We went and never returned. We arrived, planted a flag, took one small step, and then silence. More than 50 years have passed. No human has walked there again. Why did we stop reaching for the moon just when we were so close to conquering it? After Apollo 17, the world expected more. More missions, more discoveries, maybe even a lunar base. But instead, everything stopped. The spacecraft were retired, the launch pads went quiet, and NASA turned its eyes back toward Earth. Officially, the reasons were straightforward: money, politics, and risk. The Apollo program had cost the United States over $25 billion, an astronomical figure in the 1970s. Each mission carried enormous risk. Astronauts were walking inside pressurized suits, surrounded by vacuum, radiation, and shadows that could freeze instantly. Every landing was a gamble against death. And then, there was the political factor. The space race, this monumental contest between the United States and the Soviet Union, was over. America had won. The flag was planted, the message delivered. President Kennedy's dream had been fulfilled. The world had watched in awe. The United States had proven it was technologically and ideologically superior. And with that victory achieved, the political incentive vanished almost overnight. By the mid-1970s, Congress began cutting NASA's budget. Public interest declined. Newspapers no longer filled their front pages with astronauts' faces. For many Americans, the moon suddenly seemed less like a new frontier and more like an expensive distraction from crises at home. Vietnam, inflation, and an energy shortage that was gripping the nation. NASA tried to argue for continuation. Technical teams had already planned Apollos 18, 19, and 20, but one by one, they were canceled. The hardware was built, the crews selected, but the missions never flew. What remained were museum pieces, silent relics of a dream that ended before it could truly begin. To officials, it made sense. The objective had been completed, the race had been won, and exploration beyond that seemed unnecessary. But for many scientists and astronauts, stopping there felt almost tragic. They believed Apollo wasn't an ending, but a beginning. A first step to Mars, to colonization, to the next great chapter of humanity. Instead, it became a full stop. The program that had defined human ambition was suddenly deemed too costly, too dangerous, too pointless. But here's where the contradiction begins to surface. If the moon represented one of humanity's greatest achievements, wouldn't the logical step be to build on it, to return, to expand, to push further? Why stop immediately after success? Why let decades of silence follow such a monumental moment? Officially, the reasons were practical, but beneath the official version, many felt a growing sense of unease, because none of it truly explained the deeper question. Why did humanity, after touching the stars, suddenly turn away? For decades, the official explanation seemed enough. Budgets, politics, risk, logical answers for a logical world. But beneath the surface, another narrative began to grow, one that questioned whether the whole truth had ever been told. Because behind the polished press conferences and tidy explanations, there were whispers, strange details, odd remarks from the very people who had been there. Some astronauts, in interviews years later, spoke in careful, measured tones about their experiences on the moon. Eugene Cernan once said there were things they didn't fully understand. Buzz Aldrin hinted at something moving outside the spacecraft. Others, when asked directly, simply smiled and changed the subject. Of course, none of these statements were ever confirmed, and they were always dismissed as misinterpretations or garbled transmissions. Yet the pattern was there, small hints that suggested something might have happened beyond what was broadcast to the world. During the missions, several communication gaps were reported, periods when astronauts' transmissions mysteriously cut off for minutes at a time. NASA called them technical glitches, but some amateur radio operators claimed to have intercepted the lost audio. According to them, the conversations revealed that the astronauts saw lights or structures or movements on the lunar surface that were never discussed publicly. It sounds unbelievable, too fantastical to be true, and that's precisely why people kept listening. Because even though official records insist nothing strange occurred, human curiosity never stops where the facts end. It begins there. Then there are the stories from behind closed doors. Analysts who claimed that after Apollo 17, there were private discussions inside NASA about unexplained phenomena captured in high-resolution photos. Some of those images, decades later, appeared online, showing geometric shapes near craters, lights over the horizon, even shadows that resembled towers. Experts dismissed them as image artifacts, tricks of light and shadow. Still, they kept resurfacing, refusing to vanish completely. And what if, just for a moment, we asked, what if something truly unexpected was found on the moon? Something that made the space agencies hesitate to send humans back? Not because of danger in the physical sense, but because of what it might reveal? Some theorists have suggested that the moon may not be as barren as it seems, that it could hold traces of something ancient, technological, or even biological. Others believe humanity received an unspoken warning to stay away until we were ready. Outlandish? Maybe. But the unsettling part is that even the denials sometimes sound incomplete. When asked why we never returned, Some officials give practical answers. Others simply pause, as if the real answer isn't one that can be given in front of cameras. So the speculation continues, fueled by silence. We have detailed maps, satellites, and telescopes that can look billions of light years away. Yet the surface where humans once stood remains a mystery wrapped in unanswered questions. If nothing was there, why has no one ever gone back to prove it? If everything was as we were told, why so much secrecy? So many gaps, so many sudden changes in the mission schedules. Maybe there was nothing unusual. Maybe it all truly ended with Apollo 17. But there's a lingering possibility, one that both fascinates and frightens us. Perhaps we didn't choose to stop going to the moon. Perhaps we were told to. While many searched for hidden explanations, others pointed to something far more human. The truth, they said, was not buried on the moon, but here on Earth. The 1970s were years of change, turbulence, and decline. The optimism of the space age had faded. The same country that once looked up at the stars now struggled just to stay stable. The Vietnam War dragged on. The economy faltered, inflation rose, unemployment climbed, and for the first time, Americans began questioning whether reaching the moon had really changed anything at all. The public's attention turned away from space. The Apollo 11 landing had united half the planet in awe, but by Apollo 15, broadcasts drew barely any viewers. Living rooms that once erupted in cheers now changed the channel. We've been there already, people said. The magic was gone. Politicians noticed. The funding that once fueled NASA's ambitions was now redirected to solve immediate crises: war, poverty, oil shortages. By 1972, the dream of colonizing the moon was melting under the weight of earthly problems. Inside NASA, morale began to crumble. The engineers who built the Saturn V, humanity's most powerful machine, watched it roll into storage, never to fly again. Missions that had already been planned and trained for, Apollos 18, 19, and 20, were canceled, first quietly, then officially. The reasons given were budget constraints and shifting priorities, but to those within the program, it felt like betrayal. The momentum of a civilization reaching outward was suddenly reversed. At the same time, the world's balance of power was changing. The Cold War was cooling. The Soviet Union, exhausted by its own failures to reach the moon, shifted to developing space stations instead. The race was over. Without competition, the political motivation that had driven the Apollo missions evaporated. Exploration was no longer a matter of survival. It was a matter of expense, and so the lunar frontier faded from policy discussions. The moon, once the ultimate prize, became a relic of the past, a symbol of nostalgia rather than progress. Scientists argued that the next logical step was to establish a permanent base. They wrote proposals, detailed studies, blueprints for lunar habitats, but no one was listening. The world had turned inward. The dreamers were suddenly out of place in a world demanding profit and pragmatism. The final blow came from a shift in perception. The same moon that had inspired poets and scientists for centuries was now seen as a luxury, an indulgence humanity could no longer afford. Exploration was replaced by hesitation, inspiration by bureaucracy. In a way, the moon did not abandon us, we abandoned it. We had reached the summit, seen our reflection on another world, and then, blinded by the struggles of our own planet, we looked away. The geopolitics of the 1970s didn't just end lunar exploration. They ended an era where humanity dared to believe that nothing was beyond its reach. Officially, human exploration of the moon ended in 1972. But in truth, humanity never completely turned its back on that distant world. We just changed how we watched it. In the decades that followed, a silent fleet of robotic explorers took our place. Unmanned probes, orbiters, and landers were sent by nations across the globe. The Soviets continued their lunar missions. Decades later, Japan's Kaguya, China's Chang'e, India's Chandrayaan, and NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter all mapped the surface in extraordinary detail. We photographed every crater, measured every ridge, and even traced the footprints left by the Apollo crews. But no human has walked there. Not one. 50 years of silence, and not a single boot print added to the dust. Why? The technology still exists. Our rockets are more powerful than ever, our understanding deeper. Yet even with all our advancements, the moon has remained untouched. As though humanity stands at the edge of a line it is unwilling to cross again. Every so often, governments announce plans to return. By the end of the decade, they say. But the years pass, and the deadlines shift. Missions are postponed, then quietly canceled, replaced by new ones that promise the same dream. It's a strange pattern, like something unseen keeps pulling us back. Meanwhile, private companies began testing rockets, reigniting curiosity. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others spoke of lunar tourism and mining. But even now, all those announcements remain in the future tense. No human craft has landed, no astronaut has walked under that silent sky. For half a century, humanity has hovered around the moon like a ghost, always observing, never touching. It's as if, after all our accomplishments, there's an invisible barrier separating us from that pale world. Maybe the end of Apollo wasn't really the end of lunar exploration, just a pause, a long, deliberate silence. Or maybe we didn't stop because we couldn't. Maybe we stopped because something told us to. After half a century of silence, the question is no longer, why did we stop, but why are we going back? Because suddenly, the world is looking at the moon again, and this time, the reasons are very different. NASA's Artemis program, SpaceX's Starship, China's Chang'e missions, they're all racing toward the same goal, not just to visit, but to stay. The new space race isn't about Cold War pride or planting flags. It's about resources, survival, and the next step in human expansion. Scientists now believe the moon holds something far more valuable than glory. Hidden within its soil is helium-3, a rare isotope that could one day power fusion reactors, producing clean energy almost without limit. It's buried in the surface dust, waiting to be mined, and that changes everything. Then there's water, the frozen kind, locked in the dark craters near the poles. For decades, it was just a theory. Now we know it's real. And water means life. It means oxygen, fuel, and the possibility of a permanent base. Not a distant dream, but a logistical reality. The moon has transformed from an unreachable symbol into something practical, strategic, necessary. A stepping stone to Mars, to mining the asteroid belt, to building a presence beyond Earth. For private companies, it's an opportunity. For governments, it's a new frontier of power and influence. Whoever controls the moon could control not just the next generation of space exploration, but the future of energy and industry itself. And so, after 5 decades, the race begins again. But this time, the competitors are not just superpowers. They are corporations, billionaires, entire consortia of private investors. The frontier once opened by soldiers and scientists now calls to engineers, entrepreneurs, and dreamers. Yet beneath all the excitement, the same question remains. The one humanity hasn't answered since 1972. Why now? Why after all these years are we suddenly ready to return? Maybe we've grown bold again. Maybe technology has finally caught up to ambition. Or maybe something deeper is driving us back, something instinctive, almost primal. Because wherever we come from, wherever we go, there's something about that distant gray world that keeps calling us. A silent reminder that we left something behind. A message, woven in dust and silence. You've taken your first step. Now, finish the journey. If you've made it this far, it means the question still lingers. Why haven't we gone back? Subscribe and join us as we uncover the hidden stories behind humanity's greatest mysteries. Because the truth about the moon is only the beginning.